Alright, so what we're going to talk about today is what's called HDRI lighting. Okay, and using HDRI images, they're high definition images that are essentially mapped out around a sphere. Okay, and so it would be as though if you took a camera, a 360-degree camera, and took an image of this room, you'd end up with this sort of spherical shape that wraps all the way around. What we're going to do with that is we're going to make a sky object and put those images on there, and those are what we're going to use to light our scene. But first, before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about something that's called global illumination, which I'm going to talk about. That's in the render settings. So what I have here to begin with is just a simple couple of objects, a floor, and then I just have a light, a single omni light just above these objects. And when you render this out, you get an image that looks, pretty much like this, where we have, a pretty good sense of lighting, a little bit of shadow that's starting to interact that works pretty well. But it's sort of very directional in its quality. To improve on this, we can add what's called global illumination. What global illumination does is it kind of calculates the way that light will naturally bounce around in a setting or a scene, and it will add those additional reflections of light, those other elements into the scene to make a more realistic sense of lighting. Now, in terms of our basic purposes, this is going to also add a lot of rendering time to your scenes. So to begin with, what you can do is if you go to Global Illumination, and to find it, if you just go to the Effects in your render settings, you can find it down below under Global Illumination, and then just select it. It'll pop up in your screen. Once it's checked, you can see there's many different settings to choose from. Now, for this image, I'm going to be using a still image, but you can choose between animation, camera animation, and some other settings. For this, a still image is perfectly fine. And the next thing that's important is what's called the Irritants Catch. And this has to do with how accurate it's going to measure the frequency of light bouncing around in your scene. So for our purposes, I want you to use these settings because they're going to speed up your render times considerably. For the first one, the stochastic samples, just use low. For the record density, I would choose preview. For smoothing, you can choose weak, and for oversampling, make sure that's on weak as well. Now, if you have a really accurate scene that you want to light and you're going to spend a lot of time rendering, you can make additions to these. You can add in higher levels of those renderings. So once that's all checked, we can close that out and we can render out our scene. And you can see what it's going to do is it's going to take a pass over the top of your image, and it's going to start to give you a little bit more luminous image. Now we have a little bit more light bouncing into the scene, more variety of transitions, more depth in terms of the scene. So that quick initial pass, what it's doing is it's marking out all the different parameters of your scene, and it's going to calculate the way that light bounces across of it. Okay, now what we want to do with this image now that we have global illumination is we want to take this light out of here. All right. So I'm just going to get rid of this thing. What I can do is just click these two little dots to red so we don't see them in our scene anymore. And the other thing that we want to do, I forgot to mention this, in the render settings, if we're going to use an HDRI image, we want to go to the options and check the auto light off. All right? The auto light is that sort of generic light that's in your scene that allows you to see the object without having any lights on at all. If we check that off, then we won't be able to see the object at all. The next thing you're going to need in your scene is a sky. So if you just go up to the top palette where the lights are, if you go down to sky, essentially what this is it's a giant sphere, all right, that's going to encapsulate your whole scene, all right? So when you drop in a sky, it's going to add this sort of large spherical shape all the way around. And if we render out, you can see how the sky now is white. So that's just the inside of that humongous sphere that's been created to be like like our sky, right? We live in a giant sphere, and the sky is just simply the inside of that sphere. So once you have a sky, the next thing we're going to do is grab an HDRI object, and there are some that are already preset for you in the content browser. So if you go to the content browser, if you double click here, and if you go to let's see. If you go to the presets, and then if you go to so presets, and then Cinema 4D file, if you double click that, you'll get materials. All right, so we have some scenes over here. Materials, double click that, and then there's a folder down here that's called HDRI. Okay? Now each one of these, if you get the preview, do you see how those spheres, they're like they're spherical images of realistic spaces or places. So there's an outdoor scene, there's a few outdoor scenes. This one actually looks pretty good. 15 probably looks pretty good because there's actually a light source there. Or maybe this one. This one's pretty good. I guess 17 is probably what we'll choose. So if you double click that, it will drop that into your materials browser down below. I guess I already have it in here. And if you double click that and open it up, you'll notice that the image is actually placed on the luminance channel. Okay? So notice the channels that we're using here. Color is not selected. Specular is not selected. The only thing that's selected is the luminance. So in order for us to use an image for lighting, we need to have it in the luminous channel of our material. Okay? So that's all set, ready to go. And what you can do then is you can place that image, just drop that onto your sky. So if we do that, drop it in your sky. And now what you'll notice is in your editor, when you preview around here, we actually see the scene. Okay? It's a 360-degree view of the scene. Now in some cases you may want to use this in your setting. All right? If you wanted to use that, if we render this out, you'll be able to see that background. Right? There's a fountain. Okay. Notice what it's done to the object as well. We're getting the reflection on the material. We're also getting some shadow and some lighting based on that image scene. I have a question here. For my purposes in this scene, I don't really want to see the background image. I'm more interested in what the light looks like than the actual background. So what I'm going to do to the sky object is I'm going to add a compositing tag. So in the Objects Manager, if you go to Tags, Cinema 4D Tags, and down to Compositing, that's going to drop in a tag that will allow you to add additional controls to your scene. So this is a tag that will allow you to exclude light or shadow from different objects and play around in that degree. What I want to do here is, in this compositing tag, I just want to click off where it says Seen by Camera. Okay, and when I do that and I render it out again, notice that the background is gone, and now I just have that object. Because the material on my object is reflective, you can actually see that reflection in the scene. But I could easily, change that if I wanted to. But essentially what we're seeing here, let's just actually take that material and let's just click off the reflection for a minute. So notice what's happened. The color in the scene was mostly blue because it was made up of the sky. But there's also some other colors that balanced in the scene. We're seeing a little bit of red, a little bit of orange bounce in here, and those are the colors bouncing off of the buildings in that image, affecting the scene. Now the cool thing about this is that you can control this image with some of the presets in your materials editor. So in this particular image, if we double click it, you can see that there are different channels within the luminous channel that we can change. So if we just have it selected here, we can go over to Illumination and we can change the strength. If we set the strength to, let's say, 50, and let's put the saturation down to 100, and we render this out again, notice how it's a much darker scene. And it doesn't just look like it's darker altogether, but the lighting itself is affected by how it's sort of transitioning. So that gives us a much sort of darker scene overall. If we were to change it to, I don't know, 200 and bump it up even higher, you can see that it's affected the light and we're getting this more glossy, luminous kind of lighting across the scene. So just by changing the strength of the illumination, we can get those different effects as well. We can also control the saturation. So if we add more saturation, if we make this 300, we're gonna see more color in the scene. Okay, so now we see more blues, a bit more of the red entering into the scene because we're really controlling the saturation, how saturated that actual image is that we're laying into there. So those are different ways that you can control the object and how we read it. If we have very little saturation, if we just have 5% saturation, we're going to get an image that's mostly black and white. Okay? And that's going to affect the way that the image is lit as well. So HDR lighting can really change that. Let's just see the difference between two different images so you can really gauge that. So here is the image at 100% with that, you know, sort of cityscape scene of the background there. Kind of a grayed out. Actually, that's fine. 100%. And then let's choose another one. If you choose another HDRI image, maybe one of let's see. There's an interior space, I think, somewhere here. This one looks pretty good. Here's an interior space. If we change that out now, let's just delete this one and drop this one onto it. Remember this sort of blue-gray that previous one was? If we do this one now, notice how it's changed. We get this sort of muted brown tones. The light is coming from a little bit different direction. There's a little bit more noise in the scene. So just by simply changing those images out, you can get different lighting sequences. Okay, now another thing that I've done with this is you can actually create your own HDRI if you like too. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. One way that I've done this is just by simply going into Photoshop. And this is a very simple way to create an image. Now a sphere, if we take a sphere, the rectangular shape is going to be about, you know, the width is going to be twice the height. So if you get a rectangle, let's say that's, well, let's see what my image size is here. Image size is, the width is 5,000 and the height is 2,500. Okay, so the height is half of the width. That's going to wrap around your sphere really nicely. To create this was really easy. All I did was just you know, created an object, mapped out the scene, went into my gradients tools, grabbed the sort of landscape-like gradient like this, you know, and just simply made a gradient, well, like that. And then after that, I went in and added a lens flare. In the filters, I just added a lens flare to sort of make this pseudo-landscape type of scene. Okay, so I took that, I saved it in my texture file just as a JPEG or a Photoshop file, and then if we go back into Cinema 4D, if I take this and drop it into my scene, you can see that this also has an effect on my scene as well. I have a really bright light coming in from that starburst, a little bit of a warmer tone underneath and cooler tone on top, so for the lighting scene. So there's lots of different ways that you can use multiple images to create that type of effect.